Kenya's economy remains under pressure as rising debt and the high cost of living continue to affect households across the country. Governance and electoral integrity return to the spotlight amid continuing question over public trust in democratic institutions. Climate shock intensifies as erratic weather patterns deepen competition over water, food, and other limited resources. And as global cooperation weakens, Kenya grapples with growing external dependency in a shifting international order. Live from TV7 Newsroom, I'm Kigera Modoy, and we welcome our viewers in Kenya and around the world. We are with you for the next 30 minutes. Thank you for joining us. This is TV7 Newsreel. You can join the conversation on our social media handles: Facebook, TV7 Kenya, Twitter, TV7 Kenya, and the hashtag #TheBriefpoint. The rising cost of living and growing public debt continue to weigh heavily on households across Kenya, with food prices remaining high, new tax measures taking effect, and wages largely stagnant. They are struggling to meet their basic needs as the government prioritizes debt servicing and revenue collection. Concerns are mounting over the long-term impact on ordinary citizens and small businesses. TV7 correspondent Julian Kamau has been tracking this developing story and has the latest report.
For millions of Kenyans, the cost of living has become a daily struggle. Prices of basic commodities such as food, fuel, electricity, and rent have continued to rise while household income remain largely unchanged. In urban and rural areas alike, families say their purchasing power has significantly declined. A trip to the market now costs more than it did an year ago, forcing many households to reduce meal portions, delay medical care, or cut on essential expenses. At the same time, Kenya's rising public debt has placed pressure on government finances. A growing share of national revenue is now directed towards debt repayment, leaving less money available for social services such as healthcare, education, social protection programs.
Kuhusu mambo na ushuru, sijawahi ona ukiwa na participation ya kuchukua, yani kama tunataka iongezwe ama hatutaki inaongezangwa tu.
Small businesses, which form the backbone of the economy, are now feeling the impact. Reduced consumer spending, high operating costs, and increased taxation have slowed business activity, particularly from the informal sector. Economists warn that unless targeted measures are introduced to caution households, the economic pressure could deepen inequality and increase poverty levels across the country.
You have to make a choice as a country between managing politics and delivering. There is no better way of showing what you want to do other than through the budget allocations. Now, if what you want to achieve, for example, is roads, if what we want to achieve as a country is healthcare, if what we want to achieve is in education, then just follow the budget. Go check how much has been allocated.
The government, however, maintains that recent fiscal measures are necessary to stabilize the economy and ensure long-term growth. Officials argue that tough decisions today are meant to prevent a deeper economic crisis in the future. Still, many Kenyans say the impact of these policies is being felt most sharply at the household level, where survival has become the primary concern.
Our shop is 2 years. When we were starting, like we put the graph tungeweza sustain and do our sums, bring in new things like every week. Lakini like from last year things are not, because unapata hatuwezi kujiprogram azin tuseme like this week tutaendea vitu, hii wiki tutaendea vitu. Things have been very difficult.
As households continue to adjust to rising prices and limited income, pressure is now mounting on policymakers to balance debt management with the need to protect citizens from further economic hardship. Reporting for TV7, I'm Juliet Kamau.
And now our correspondent Juliet Kamau joins us live. Julie, you've been following the impact of rising public debt and the high cost of living across Kenya. From what you've seen on the ground, just how serious is the situation for ordinary households right now?
Kigera, it is extremely serious. What stands out is that the pressure is no longer limited to low-income households. Even middle-income earners are struggling. Many people say that income is now consumed entirely by rent, food, transport, and utilities, leaving no room for saving or emergency fund.
And as this debate continues, Kenyans have been sharing their frustration online. So Julie, what does this pressure mean for business and employment?
That's the scary part, in that we have to get to that point where people stand up because they really don't know what exactly federal agencies do. But this is going to impact everybody, either directly or indirectly, in some form or fashion.
Julie, thanks so much for coming in. I appreciate it. We'll continue to watch this and hope we as Kenyans gain much insight on the issue. The rising cost of living and growing public debt continue to weigh heavily on households across Kenya, with food prices remaining high, new tax measures taking effect, and wages largely stagnant. Many families say they are struggling to meet their basic needs as the government prioritizes debt servicing and revenue collections. Concerns are mounting over the long-term impact on ordinary citizens and small businesses. To help us analyze what economic fragility and debt distress means for the ordinary Kenyan, I'm joined by George Mwaro, who is an economic analyst. Welcome to the Briefpoint. So George, the figures coming out of the 2026 budget policy statement are quite alarming. The government is projected to borrow about shilling 1.00 trillion from the domestic market just to meet its obligation. From your perspective, the state is calling this a tough transition, but are we actually seeing signs of the country edging closer to a full-blown debt trap?
Yes. Where we sit, we are already vulnerable. When you look at our budget, each and every financial year, the budget keeps on growing. And there is no any financial year where Kenya, we were able to finance our budget based on our own source revenue. Most of the time, in fact, if not all, since 2013, we've been depending on debt to finance that budget. So we are becoming vulnerable, and each and every time, each and every year, we keep borrowing. Statistics show, like yesterday, I was going through a certain article where I say that Kenya is borrowing over 10 million a day, 10 million Kenya shillings a day. So that shows you that we are likely not to come out of this situation unless we make the right decision at the back.
And should ordinary Kenyans be concerned that these economic pressures could translate into real-life impacts like shortages of essential medicine in public health facility or delays in dispersing funds to public school? Or from where you sit, is the mwananchi likely to feel the strain more directly?
Yes, they should be. They should be, because in the case of a small disability, for example, we might have something like a crisis, a global crisis, like currently we're having war in the Gulf state, which is basically disrupting the supply of basic commodities like fuel. That means that the price will go up. So the government will spend a lot of its revenue to pay for that. But remember, it was not prepared. And that means that the citizens have to be worried of that.
And there are reports from organizations like Oxfam Kenya suggesting the burden isn't shared equally, with concern about a widening gap between the rich and the poor. From your perspective, how significant is this inequality gap?
Yeah, we have a very big gap in Kenya between the rich and the poor. Yes, and when it comes to servicing the debt, the poor pays more than the rich. This is because the tax system of Kenya taxes more the poor than the rich. Remember, the poor have spent almost all their income, all their disposable income on the basic amenities which are taxed through VAT. So that makes them, in fact, majority of them, they spend 0 shillings on development or on investments. So if you earn 8,000 a month, you have people who earn 8,000 a month, and all 8,000 goes on basic amenities which are taxed through VAT. You see, you are paying more. than this somebody who is earning 100,000 and is only spending 20% on the basic amenities. The rest is investing. So we have that gap, which is not sitting well. And probably the gap might be permanent unless the government makes some strategies to curb it.
The reality for Kenyan households remain harsh. We are navigating an economy where both the state and its citizens are struggling to stay afloat. Thank you, George Mwaro, for helping us make sense of these complex issues. Moving on to our other developing story. We begin with growing questions surrounding governance and electoral integrity, a story that continues to shape Kenya's political environment. Persistent concerns over governance, institutional credibility, and electoral preparedness as Kenya steadily moves towards its next general election. Questions surrounding the readiness of key democratic institutions, public confidence in governance processes, and the political climate in major urban centers remain unresolved. This concern has sparked renewed debate among political leaders, civil society groups, and citizens about the strength of Kenya's democratic framework. Our correspondent Job Ojuma has been closely following these developments.
Kenya's electorate system remains under sustained and growing public scrutiny. As preparation towards the next general election continue, attention has increasingly turned to the institution responsible for safeguarding the credibility of the electoral process. At the center of this discussion is the Independent Electoral and Boundaries Commission, which continues to oversee voter registration, activities by election and other electoral process amid heightened public expectations.
Kuna uandikishaji wa wapiga kura ambao unaendelea kwa siku 30 katika kila ward ya kaunti hii. Wito wetu ni kuwaeleza kwamba tungependa mujiandikishe kama wapiga kura, hasa vijana wetu ambao wametoka kupata vitambulisho.
While the commission maintains that it is executing its constitutional mandate, critics argue that unresolved structural and operational challenges could affect the public confidence if not addressed decisively. Concerns have been raised over issues such as resource constraints, institutional independence, boundaries review processes, and the long-term credibility of the electoral technologies. In Nairobi and other major towns, these debates have increasingly merged with broader conversations about governance, accountability, and the role of public institutions in a democratic society.
My name is Kibarenge, and I think the 2027 election will not be free and fair. We can see all indications and signs are that we are headed for a very chaotic election. In fact, this regime is planning to reach the 2027 election because you can see them militarizing the police. You can see how they are rearranging the Supreme Court, and you can also see they are doing everything to whip emotions, to set community against community. Just recently we saw something called the NTV Expo, the 2007 election, and that's what the timing is meant to whip emotions and incite communities against each other. So they are preparing to reach the 2027 election, but unfortunately Kenyans have realized that their problem is not a tribe. Kenyans have realized that our problem is bad governance.
Parliamentary discussions around electoral funding and governance frameworks have further intensified scrutiny, highlighting the political and economic pressure surrounding elections preparedness. Analysts say these debates reflect deeper questions about whether Kenya's democratic institutions are evolving in step with rising public expectations, particularly among younger voters who are demanding greater accountability and openness.
Many citizens feel that if the leaders they choose are not the one who end up in the office due to election malpractices, then their voices on economic will never be heard. We are seeing a big gap between what the officials are saying and what the people on the ground are saying. Unless there is transparency in how we are governed, the economic whole will only get deeper. Reporting for TV7 News Nairobi, my name is Job Ojuma.
With me now in studio is Ezra Mark Odhiambo, a political and constitutional expert. First, how would you describe governance and power in Kenya?
I'm an upcoming scholar, and in my coming book about politics and governance,
congratulations.
When I say politics, it's poly and ticks. So tick is tower. I say power is powerful and power is selfish. When I say power is selfish is when the legislature or the leaders are elected to these political seats, they forget the power that is powerful, but they get to the power that is selfish. In no time, when the Land Cruisers and the TX Prados start ferrying you from your home to your office, you forget the shoes that you wore while you are campaigning. You might have the people's interest at heart at first, but once you taste tunataka power, you forget. You become selfish. So in my book, I'm trying to deduce and also to restructure it where selfish power can be a powerful power, whereby you use the power that you have in your own capacity, one, to benefit mwananchi, two, not to go home in coffers. It sounds selfish and it sounds powerful. So yes, everyone has the mwananchi's interest at heart when they're looking for votes, but when they get to power, they forget.
We have seen every time we are approaching a general election in Kenya, the government takes time to reconstitute the commissioners for IEBC. Does this have anything to do with abuse of power?
I'll put it in this context. We've all interacted with this phrase, tunataka power. And it's so saddening in that it delays, because this is the moment where an entire country is taking part in a democratic right that is in a constitution. And it's taking long. Questions brings up questions about its real meaning of independence. Is it truly independent? And why is it that when it gets to that period, that's why we have budgetary problems, that's why we have some little ethnic problems. So it brings us to a point whereby we question democracy than independence. We question budgetary reforms than electoral reforms. And I'd say the elite use it to seize power, as the mwananchi still remain dangling. And it's so sad to my end.
Maybe to touch on one of the potential inciters of electoral malpractice, is the Independent Electoral Commission independent?
Forgive me for saying this, but it's the dire truth. IEBC is independent on paper, independent in definition, independent in its acronyms, Independent Electoral Commission of Kenya. So, but when you get to the reality, it's not independent. My thought about it, I'm an overthinker and I love overthinking such things because it gives me a bigger picture. When we have another independent body instituting an independent body, then I think we'd have 50% or 70% independence. But now this is a scenario whereby a sitting president who is yearning to maybe stay there for 40 years, constituting such a body. That gives room for electing or for appointing people who would do what I want as a sitting president. We've seen things happen, so-and-so resigns or so-and-so. Why would they do that? If you're passionate about serving Kenyans, then you'd stay there. So it's not independent per se, and its independence is questionable a lot, because we've had several elections all the way from 2002, where we said Kibaki tosha, Kibaki got. Now we go to 2007, where now we question its independence utterly. Then we get to 2017, where we said Fungua Sava. They've never Now we are here in we are approaching 2027. I don't know what this is going to hold. Yes, I hope mkokadi, jumini kokadi. I hope the Nikokadi movement or the Nikokadi phrase would make us test the independence of IEBC.
Thank you, Ezra, for giving us time. And before we wrap up, let's see what we have online. So at Kamau J says the 27 toolkit looks exactly like the old one. Where is the reform? And at Mukaguzi Wasiasa says state machinery belongs to the taxpayer, not the candidate. Coming up after the break, across Kenya, climate-related shocks are becoming more frequent and more disruptive, from flooding in major towns to prolonged dry spells in other regions. We'll dwell onto how these environmental pressures are intensifying competition over water, food systems, and livelihood. That's next on the Briefpoint.
Unleash the storm. New charged Berry Bolt.
Welcome back to the Briefpoint. Across Kenya, climate-related shocks are becoming more frequent and more disruptive, from flooding in major towns to prolonged dry spells in other regions. How these environmental pressures are intensifying competition over water, food systems, and livelihoods. Our correspondent Zainab Said reports on how these climate pressures are unfolding.
Across Kenya, climate-related shocks are no longer isolated events. They are becoming a recurring challenge in urban areas. Periods of intense rainfall have repeatedly led to flooding, damaging roads, homes, and businesses, and straining drainage systems. Yet, even as flood waters rise, water shortage and rationing continue to affect many households.
Nairobi as a county, for example, I think it has a lot deep more than just the drainage systems that we have. But again, the government must always prepare. For example, they must ensure the drainage systems are clear. They are made in a proper manner, so much that when it rains or the climate has changed, then we have very clear channels through which that water is going to move through.
In rural regions, prolonged dry conditions have disrupted agricultural production, reduced pasture availability, and placed pressure on water sources. Farmers and pastoralist communities say unpredictable rainfall patterns are making traditional planning increasingly difficult. Experts warn that these extremes point to a broader pattern of climate instability affecting both urban and rural Kenya. The economic effects are already visible in local markets, where disruptions in supply chains continue to place pressure on food prices. In several regions, competition over limited resources, including water, arable land, and pasture, is intensifying, raising concerns about long-term social and economic strain. As these climate pressures continue to unfold, experts say long-term planning, adaptation, and investment will be critical to reducing future risks. Zainab Said, TV7, Nairobi.
To help us make sense of these growing pressures, I'm joined by Kevin Okech, a climate and development analyst. We can see our drainage in cities like Nairobi was built for the weather of the 1990s, 1960. Can we build fast enough to handle the heavy rains that scientists say are being caused by global warming today?
In another perception, I will say building a new drainage system that cannot work, and I know automatically that for an implementation of such drainage system to be done, you will realize that there are a lot of mechanisms that needs to take place. One thing that needs to come out clearly is maintenance of this drainage system. I'm not saying that we can't build new drainage system, but I'm trying to say that when you look at the government of the day, it might be so much difficult for them to build a new drainage system. And remember, the government has authority to build the drainage system across the city, especially the county government. But now let's ask ourselves a very simple question. Do the county government have a plan to do so? They don't have. Because, you know, the county government budget is passed through the county assembly. When will the assembly sit down and pass a bill or a financial budget related to drainage system? They won't. And that's why I'm returning back to us, that we should maintain the 1960s, 1990s drainage system that we've been having and has been serving us all through from that time to date. This is almost 50 years down the line. It means that this drainage system was built in a very powerful way. The contractor did a very good job.
Kenya needs a lot of money to deal with climate change, but we only have a small amount. Is it fair to say Kenyans are paying with their lives for a global problem they did not cause?
There are a lot of factors that has led to that. First of all, you will realize that from 2023 to 2026, there is a difference in climate. There is a change in climate. And this has been caused by the activities of human beings in the earth. That is, number one, destructions of the forest that leads to rainfall that is not imbalanced. You know, therefore, the rain that we currently have is imbalanced in one way or another. Number two, also, we can talk about the constructions that are happening in the earth are also leading to destructions of the climate in one way or another. For example, and I think NEMA is not doing what it's supposed to do. The constructions of roads and railways in the country, specifically when I talk about Kenya, should actually cope up the development, the economical development, but also look at the future of the climate. But then you realize that it's not taking that shape in one way or another. Why? Because there are other agencies of the government that has slept on their eyes, on the ears, and they're not doing what is supposed to be done. And that's the reason why we have a fluctuation in the weather that we are currently facing. Now, when you talk about the eastern part of the country, whereby they face heavy rainfall, not rainfall, but sun, it is because of the equatorial of the earth. And apart from that, the human activities that are also taking place in that other part of the land that leads to the destructions of the climate condition, and then at the end of the day, the fluctuation that we are facing.
That was a frank assessment, Kevin Okech. Thank you for sharing with us. Up next, we shift focus to another developing story. Finally tonight, Kenya's place in a rapidly changing global economic and political environment, shifting global financing conditions, geopolitical competition, and evolving international partnerships continue to shape the choices facing development economies. For Kenya, these global shifts are increasingly influencing domestic economic policy and long-term development planning. Our correspondent Mildred Odhiambo reports.
Kenya's development agenda remains closely tied to global engagement. From infrastructure financing to trade partnerships, international cooperation continues to play a central role in public investment and economic planning. But the global environment is changing. Rising interest rates, geopolitical competition, and tighter financing conditions are reshaping how developing countries access capital and manage economic risks. For Kenya, this has intensified debate around debt sustainability, economic diversification, and the balance between external partnerships and domestic resilience. Analysts note that decisions made now on borrowing, trade alignment, and regional cooperation could define Kenya's economic stability for years to come. As global dynamics continue to shift, Kenya's ability to adapt while safeguarding economic sovereignty remains under close watch.
For economic perspective, I'm joined by George Mwaro, an economic analyst. George, thank you for joining us. We've seen the report Kenya's bargaining power seems to be an all-time low. How does multilateralism translate to the cost of living?
Multilateralism is the way I understand it is a relationship between nations, between countries. When that relationship weakens, it comes with some consequences For example, we can say East Africa. When the relationship between East African countries weakens, so that means it becomes so difficult to cross the borders. A lot of implications are put across. High taxation at borders, a lot of waiting time at borders, bureaucratic procedures to cross borders. For example, we want to cross from Uganda to Kenya or from Kenya to Tanzania. It becomes a challenge. How does this affect common mwananchi? Remember, we depend on each other. And when this relationship weakens, Kenya, we sometimes import products from our neighboring countries. So when a lot of taxes are imposed due to a poor relationship between these countries, those high taxation, remember, it is the common mwananchi who pays the taxes. So when taxes are increased at the border, these taxes are transferred to the pocket of the common mwananchi. So it translates to a higher prices of products.
Is weakened multilateralism affecting Kenyan policies, and what structural changes can be implemented by Africa as a continent?
Yeah, it is really affecting our policies, especially the fiscal policies. And these policies majorly is just to help the government raise money to be able to service these loans. Okay, on that point, the structural changes that need to be done, I'll advise the Kenyan government to majorly focus on borrowing to invest. Borrow and put the money in a capital project. A project that will generate income to service that loan, number one, or a project that will attract investors, number two. Initially, like probably in the former regime, the Uhuru regime, there were a lot of publicity on dams. They really promised several dams. You understand? That's the point. They borrowed a lot. But currently we are not seeing those dams. The intention of borrowing was to create dams, and these dams will have enabled production, and production that will have brought in income, or these dams will have attracted investments which will have brought in income. But remember, they borrowed, but they never did the dams. So we can avoid such kind of borrowing. Yeah, borrowing probably you borrow to pay salary, like what we're witnessing currently. The reason why the debt has grown is because we borrow to do what? To spend on recurrent. So we focus on capital projects, borrow for capital gain, for projects that bring income. We avoid borrowing for recurrent expenditure.
George, that was a clear-eyed view of the multilateral situation at hand. Thank you for sharing your insights.
Thank you.
Indomie, ijaribu leo. Yum yum.
And that is our verdict for this week. Question around electoral governance, the unfolding impact of climate pressures, economic strain at home, and Kenya's place in a shifting global order. These are issues still evolving with consequences that will shape Kenya's future. From all of us here at TV7 Newsroom, thank you for trusting us with your time. Stay informed, stay vigilant. I'm your host, Kigera Modoi. Adios, muchachos.